I'm 49, and I should be looking forward to retirement, not having an identity crisis. Decades spent perfecting the roles of supportive wife and dutiful mother have left me hollow. The life I built is stable, comfortable, and absolutely not mine. The realization hit me while watching my family proceed with their routines, completely oblivious to my existence outside of their needs. I need to radically reclaim my autonomy and discover who I was, supposed to be before I turn 50. My goal is simple: dismantle the life everyone expects me to live and start over completely. But freeing myself means disappointing the people who rely on me most, and their expectations are a powerful anchor, threatening to pull me back into a role that is slowly killing me. The realization didn't hit like a lightning strike. It was more like the slow, steady drip of a leaky faucet finally filling the basement. You ignore the sound for years, pretending the humidity is normal, until one morning you step down and the floorboards give way. I was 49. It was a Tuesday. I remember the exact texture of the stale air in the living room because the air conditioning had been rattling for 3 weeks and I hadn't called the repairman yet. That was the essence of the problem, I suppose. There was always something broken that I was supposed to fix. But the tools were always in the wrong box, and my energy was always dedicated to fixing things that mattered less. I was sitting in my designated chair, the one molded by years of my own weight, looking at a framed photo of our last family vacation. A smiling unit, tanned and pretending to enjoy the beach. The smiles were decent performances, but the effort behind them was what exhausted me now. I remembered that trip not for the sunset, but for the spreadsheets I had to finish in the hotel lobby after everyone went to sleep, just so the company wouldn't panic while I was gone. Somewhere between paying off the second car and ensuring the kids' college applications were flawless, I had outsourced my own interior life. I had become the infrastructure. I wasn't a person with desires. I was the supporting beam, holding up everyone else's ceiling. The moment of absolute clarity arrived when my wife asked me what I wanted for dinner. Simple question. Loaded question. I heard myself say, "Whatever you want, honey. I'm easy." And the voice in my head, the one I hadn't listened to since I was 25, screamed back, "You are not easy. You are terrified." Terrified that if I asked for what I actually wanted, which was quiet, silence, a meal that wasn't tied to anyone else's preference, I would be demanding too much. Terrified that if I dropped the mask of the stable, dependable patriarch, the whole structure might wobble. I had spent 25 years running toward goals that weren't mine. I took the job with the terrible commute because it had the better 401k. I bought the house in the subdivision with the HOA because the schools were better. I spent Saturdays volunteering for things I didn't care about because it looked good on the kids' resumes, or because my wife wanted to socialize. I looked at the life I had built, and it was impeccable. It was efficient. It was safe. But it felt like a perfectly designed prison cell. The kids were grown now. One was in grad school, the other starting their first real job across the country. They called on Sundays, polite and distant. They were launched, successful versions of the people we told them to be. My job was ostensibly finished. And yet, the alarm still went off at 6 a.m. The suit still felt heavy on my shoulders. The meetings were still pointless, the office politics still draining. I kept showing up because that's what the infrastructure does. It doesn't retire just because the tenants moved out. I started running an inventory of myself. What did I actually like? What did I genuinely believe? The questions were met with static. I tried to remember the last book I read purely for pleasure. It was a decade ago. I tried to remember the last time I listened to music that wasn't background noise while driving. I couldn't. I realized I hadn't just sacrificed my time or my money. I had sacrificed my curiosity. I had traded the potential of who I could be for the certainty of who I needed to be for them. The deepest frustration wasn't anger at my family. They hadn't forced me. I had volunteered, proudly, even smugly, believing that sacrifice was the definition of maturity. The frustration was the silent internal screaming directed only at myself. You were the one holding the map, and you drove straight into the wall. Now, at 49, standing on the wreckage of my own neglected desires, the terrifying question wasn't about the 401k or the mortgage. The terrifying question was about time. I had maybe 30 good years left. If I spent another 5 years maintaining this perfectly good, perfectly empty life, I would be halfway through the good years. I looked down at my hands. They were the hands of a man who signed contracts and mowed the lawn. They weren't the hands of the man who used to draw, or the one who wanted to learn a second language, or the one who dreamt of hiking mountains instead of climbing corporate ladders. I was standing there, financially secure, socially established, completely and utterly lost. The silence of the house magnified the ringing in my ears. I knew I needed to start over. But how do you tear down the whole damn building when everyone is still living inside? How do you even find the blueprints for the person you abandoned 30 years ago? I didn't just need a new direction. I needed a whole new operating system, and I didn't even know where the power button was located. The power button, I realized, wasn't physically missing. It was buried under 49 years of accumulated expectations. It wasn't just my own expectations either. It was the weight of the mortgage, the college funds, the perception of stability I had carefully constructed for everyone else. The house demanded maintenance. The marriage demanded attention. The career demanded performance. Every single day was a performance, and the audience was my own life. The inertia of that routine was the real enemy. It's easy to say, I'll start over. It's much harder to face Tuesday morning when Tuesday morning requires you to be the same reliable pillar you were on Monday, Sunday, and every day for the last 2 decades. You can't just stop showing up because you had an epiphany at 3 a.m. My alarm went off the next day, and I got up. I made the coffee. I checked the market data. I dressed for the role. This is the insidious nature of burnout after 40. You're too disciplined to let the whole thing collapse, even if collapsing is the only way out. You execute the motions perfectly, because you are a professional, even at self-destruction. I looked at my wife across the breakfast table. We spoke the language of logistics, school pickups, contractor quotes, vacation planning for next year. We had perfected the art of sharing a life without sharing a self. She was talking about something mundane, and I was listening, nodding, calculating how many years it would take to liquidate everything we owned without triggering a panic event. How do you tell the person you promised forever to that the person who made that promise doesn't exist anymore? That he was an avatar, a highly functional placeholder who finally ran out of battery? The realization didn't come in a sudden flash of light. It was the slow, steady drip of small betrayals. I remembered the pivot point. It wasn't a dramatic choice. It was the year I decided the stable job was better than the creative risk. It was the summer I stopped painting because the kids needed constant supervision. It was every dinner party where I prioritized making the guests feel comfortable over saying what I actually thought. I traded my edge for comfort, my wildness for predictability, my true voice for background noise. We call it maturity. We call it sacrifice. We convince ourselves that chipping away at our own desires to fuel the success of the unit is noble. And maybe it is, until you look in the mirror and realize the vessel is empty. The deepest frustration wasn't the loss of potential success. It was the loss of curiosity. I used to devour books, argue politics late into the night, spend hours building things that served no practical purpose. Now, my mental landscape was a detailed spreadsheet of expenses and obligations. My brain was a ledger, not a library. I decided, sitting in traffic that morning, that the first step couldn't be radical action. Radical action would destroy the house while people were still inside. The first step had to be excavation. I needed to find a protected corner, a secret basement, where I could start digging for that abandoned self. But where? every hour of the day was accounted for. Time is the currency of the successful middle-aged, and mine was entirely spent paying the bills of my existence. I started taking the long route home. A 30-minute detour through neighborhoods I didn't know, listening to music I hadn't heard since high school, just to steal 20 minutes of genuine, unobserved solitude. This wasn't rebellion. It was survival. It was the equivalent of a man dying of thirst, licking the dew off a window pane. Those 20 minutes became sacred. In that car, I was not a husband, not a father, not an executive. I was just the driver. And for the first time in years, the silence wasn't the sound of an empty life. It was the sound of the engine idling, waiting for instructions that only I could give. The question wasn't, how do I start over? The real question was, how do I stop serving the contract I signed in my 20s? The contract that promised security in exchange for my soul. And the terrifying answer was that breaking the contract meant becoming unreliable. And I had spent half my life building a reputation for being the opposite of that. I knew that the moment I started putting my own blueprints back together, the seismic shock would ripple outwards. I had to learn to live with the idea that my healing might, temporarily, feel like damage to everyone else. That was the hidden cost of the late life pivot. Accepting that the people you loved most would probably hate the process of watching you finally choose yourself. That evening, I did something small, almost insignificant. My wife asked me to finalize the catering list for a charity event, a task I would normally handle efficiently. I simply said, "No, I won't be managing that." No drama, no explanation, just a clean, dry boundary. The shock on her face was immediate, followed by a slight confusion. "But you always handle the logistics." "I know," I said, "but I won't today." It was a tiny pebble dropped into a vast, still pond, but I felt the ripple start immediately. And for the first time in a long time, the feeling wasn't exhaustion. It was a nervous, almost painful flicker of energy. The power button was responding. The silence that followed was thick, coated in years of unspoken agreement. She didn't press the issue immediately. She simply stared, waiting for the predictable narrative arc. My initial, exhausted resistance, followed by my inevitable sigh, and then the quiet capitulation where I would pick up the logistics binder and solve the thing. That's how it always went. But the sigh never came. I watched her face calculate the variables. It wasn't anger yet, just genuine bewilderment. The kind of look you give a machine that has suddenly failed to perform its core, expected function. "Okay," she finally said, dragging the word out. "Then who will?" "I don't know," I replied, and the honesty of that answer shocked me more than it shocked her. It was the first time I had ever admitted that I wasn't the designated solver of every household issue. The space I usually filled with frantic problem-solving was now just empty air. I felt the urge to fill that air, to explain, to apologize, to soften the refusal with a promise that I'd be back to normal tomorrow. But I held it down, biting back the apology. Apologies are currency when you are resetting the entire economy of a relationship. I was bankrupting myself, but I was also leveling the playing field. The truth about living for others is that competence becomes a cage. When you are the one who handles the doctor appointments, the school forms, the tax, documents, the travel arrangements. Not because you love it, but because you are good at it. You lose the right to be human. You become a resource, and resources don't get tired. They just occasionally need maintenance. I was 49, and I was finally demanding to be taken out of inventory. The ripple extended immediately to the kids. Later that evening, my son came into the kitchen, holding a permission slip that required scheduling a complicated carpool for a weekend trip. He usually just slid it onto my desk, knowing the calendar invite would appear in his inbox by morning. "Mom, he started, his voice already pitching towards practiced helplessness. "I really need this done by tomorrow." The old me would have stopped stirring the pasta, grabbed my phone, and started coordinating 4 other parents via text, ignoring the steam scalding my face. The new me looked him straight in the eye. "That sounds like a complicated project, honey. What's your first step going to be?" He froze. His face went blank. "What do you mean, my first step? You just email Mrs. Peterson and figure out whose van is available." "I see. That's certainly a strategy," I said, leaning against the counter. "But I'm not managing that logistics puzzle right now. If you want to go, you need to find the ride." His reaction was not gratitude or understanding. It was irritation. He was inconvenienced by my sudden existence as a separate person. This was the hardest part, recognizing that the love I felt and the love they returned was inextricably tangled with the service I provided. When I pulled back the service, the love felt momentarily conditional, suspended in confusion. I realized I hadn't just outsourced a task. I had challenged a foundational myth of our family. The myth that mom is the constant, reliable, self-fueling engine that ensures smooth operation, even if she has to run on fumes. That night, I couldn't sleep. The relief of the refusal was real, but it was overshadowed by a deep, terrifying anxiety. For 25 years, my internal map had been defined by their needs. Now, the map was blank. When you spend decades pouring yourself into definitions created by others, wife, mother, coordinator, manager, you lose the muscle memory for your own shape. If I wasn't solving their problems, what was I supposed to be doing with my hands? With my mind? I got out of bed, careful not to wake my husband. I walked into the dark living room. The clock said 3:17 a.m. This was the hour when the mask slips and the true cost of the past catches up. I saw the piles of papers on the dining table, the remnants of the life I had built for everyone else, and I felt the panic rise, cold and sharp. Setting a boundary was one thing, figuring out what to build in the negative space was another. The true work of starting over at 49 isn't about leaving everything behind. It's about staying exactly where you are and creating a separate orbit within the existing gravitational pull. It's about learning to say, "I am here, but I am no longer orbiting you." The nervous flicker of energy I felt earlier was gone. Now it was just the heavy, sobering weight of realization. If I am going to find out who I am, I have to be willing to be disliked for a while. I have to be willing to watch things fail, knowing that I possess the ability to fix them, but choosing instead to let the others learn how to stand up on their own 2 feet. That choice felt less like liberation and more like an act of necessary cruelty. But for the first time, the cruelty was directed not at myself, but at the comfortable inertia that had consumed 49 years of my life. I sat in the darkness, tasting the strange metallic flavor of self-preservation. It was bitter, but undeniably real. The metallic flavor of self-preservation stayed with me for weeks. It wasn't just a taste, it was the atmosphere of the house. I had withdrawn the anchor, and the entire ship, my family, my friends, my professional orbit, was listing badly. When you spend 4 decades defining yourself as the emergency contact for everyone else's reality, the sudden withdrawal leaves a psychic vacuum. The silence wasn't restful. It was a roar of absence. I was used to the background hum of impending crisis, the low-frequency drone of someone needing something, needing me seize. Now, that noise was gone, and I realized it had been masking the sound of my own quiet, slow decay. I had effectively fired myself from the only job I truly excelled at, chief problem solver. The predictable reactions came quickly. They weren't attacks, not exactly. They were attempts at re-enrollment. They tried to lure me back into the comfortable servitude. My daughter called, not crying, but using that specific pitch of manufactured helplessness. The one that implies if I don't step in immediately, the universe will collapse on her apartment lease. Dad, I don't know what to do. The landlord is demanding the second half of the deposit by Friday, and you know how tight money is. In the past, I would have been on the phone with the bank, rationalizing the sacrifice before she even finished the sentence. This time, I paused. I let the silence hang, heavy and unnatural. That sounds like a serious logistics problem, I said, my voice flat, almost clinical. What is your plan to handle that? She didn't register the shift, immediately. She just repeated the problem, louder, as if I hadn't heard the first time. I told you, I don't know what to do. That's why I called. No, I corrected her gently, my gut twisting. This felt awful, like rejecting a drowning person's hand. You called because you expected me to tell you my plan. I'm asking you for yours. The ensuing silence was glorious and terrible. It contained all the disappointment and immediate resentment of someone realizing their primary resource is suddenly unavailable. Wow, she finally managed, the word dripping with accusation. You've really changed. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I just absorbed the accusation and owned it. Yes, I have. I hope you figure out a good solution by Friday. Let me know what you decide. I hung up. My hand was shaking. I hadn't solved the problem, but I had solved mine. I had enforced the boundary. The cost was high. The immediate disapproval of someone I loved. Someone who previously saw me as infallible and infinitely pliable. I sat there, staring at the phone, understanding a brutal truth. They weren't mourning the loss of my love or my presence. They were mourning the loss of the predictable, functional system I represented. My value had become almost entirely transactional. This realization wasn't freeing. It was profoundly isolating. It confirmed that the person I had been for 49 years was not, in fact, beloved, but utilized. The next few weeks became an exercise in intentional awkwardness. I started saying no to dinner invites I secretly dreaded. I stopped reading the group chats that demanded emotional bandwidth I didn't possess. I began using the word I more often than we, or they. I started walking in the mornings, not a power walk, not exercise. Just walking to observe the sidewalks, the light hitting the brickwork, the way the fog settled over the creek bed. Things I had never truly noticed because I was always preoccupied, mentally running the calculations for someone else's crisis budget. The most challenging part of this new existence wasn't the external fight. It was the internal void. When I wasn't fixing things, who was I? I spent an entire Saturday in my house, entirely alone, with no chores pending, no obligations looming. The quiet was so intense it felt aggressive. I walked into the garage, looked at the tools, considered a project, and then realized I didn't want to build anything right now. I just wanted to be still. This stillness, this profound lack of purpose defined by external demands, felt like floating in deep space. Terrifying, cold, but finally, weightless. I was 49, and I was just now learning what it meant to simply exist, unburdened. The process of starting over wasn't about finding a grand new goal. It was about defining the space where a goal might someday be allowed to grow. It was about creating fertile ground where only scorched earth had been before. The stillness ended up being the most active phase of my life. You cannot build a new life until you first excavate the old one, and the old one was built entirely out of consensus and compromise. It was a ruin, meticulously maintained. I had to start a clinical inventory, not of things, the house was fine, but of the self. This was harder than any corporate audit I'd ever managed. I realized that my entire personality for the last 3 decades had been a high-functioning response system. I was an elaborate algorithm designed to minimize family friction and maximize domestic efficiency. I sat down with a notebook, looking for the self I was supposed to be unearthing. What did I actually want? What did I genuinely enjoy doing? The page stayed blank. My hobbies were scheduling things. My greatest joys were the moments when everyone else was satisfied, which meant I could finally rest, briefly, before the next demand arrived. I tried to recall a single defining interest, something I pursued purely for my own pleasure since 1998. Nothing. Every movie watched, every book read, every trip taken, had been filtered through the preferences of my husband, my kids, or the collective necessity of the family unit. I was a mirror, reflecting everyone else's light, and I had forgotten what color I was supposed to be. The terror wasn't that I had no hobbies. The terror was that there might be no self left at all. Just the caretaker infrastructure. The first step in defining that fertile ground wasn't a grand gesture. It was a brutal, surgical separation from the established routine. I realized the smallest acts of self-reclamation were the most revolutionary. The morning was the battlefield. For 25 years, I woke up, went straight to the kitchen, and started the engine of the household. Lunches packed, dog fed, coffee brewed for 3 people. My coffee was always an afterthought, usually lukewarm, taken standing up while directing traffic. My first act of sovereignty. I bought a small, high-quality French press, just for me. I hid it in the back of the pantry. The next morning, I woke 10 minutes earlier than usual, went to the kitchen, and made exactly 1 cup of coffee, strong, dark, without the milk and sugar I kept buying for everyone else. I did not announce it. I did not offer to share. I went out onto the back deck, sat down on the cold wood, and drank that coffee, hot and bitter, in absolute silence, watching the neighbor's security light turn off as the sun came up. 10 minutes, unshared, uninterrupted. This wasn't just coffee. It was a boundary line drawn in caffeine. This small, selfish act created a pocket of existence that was purely mine. It was exhilarating and deeply unnerving. It felt like stealing time that rightfully belonged to my family's needs. And that was the core struggle, the guilt. Decades of conditioning taught me that prioritizing myself, even for 10 minutes, was a moral failure, an imbalance that would cause the whole structure to list. The house noticed the shift immediately, not the kids. They were mostly focused on their phones, sensing only a slight lag in the breakfast service. But Mark, my husband, noticed. Mark is a good man, but he operates on the assumption of infrastructure. He expects the house to run like a well-oiled machine, and he knows I am the oil. He didn't ask what was wrong. He asked, slightly irritated, why the gas company bill hadn't been paid. It was 2 days past due. For years, I would have apologized, grabbed the laptop, and fixed it immediately. This time, I looked him straight in the eye, still holding the empty French press mug, and said, "I haven't paid it yet. I've been busy." "Busy with what?" he asked, without malice, just genuine confusion. He meant, busy with what that wasn't fixing my life? I didn't answer. I just walked past him and put my mug in the sink. The shock on his face was minor, but it felt seismic to me. It wasn't anger. It was the confusion of a machine operator when a key component suddenly stops responding to the input command. He had to pay the bill himself. It took him 15 minutes, during which he sighed twice, loudly. The guilt hit me, sharp and deep, but I held the line. That discomfort, his minor inconvenience, was the tax I had to pay to reclaim my soul. If I kept shielding everyone from the mild discomforts of adult life, I would remain invisible, serving only as their administrative assistant until the day I collapsed. Starting over at 49 meant accepting that I had to disappoint the people I loved. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. Their disappointment was proof that I was finally taking up space. It was the only way to prove I wasn't just weightless dust waiting to be swept away. The fertile ground wasn't a place of quiet acceptance. It was a battleground where I fought the deeply ingrained urge to apologize for simply existing. The fight to exist wasn't fought with anger. Anger would have been easier. Anger is energy. The start was fought with exhaustion, a deep, silent refusal to move unless the movement was for me. I stopped, doing the small things that had been invisible acts of service for 20 years, the mental load that kept their world turning. I stopped tracking the appointments. I stopped making the lists. I stopped remembering that the kids needed new shoes, or that the tax documents were due next Tuesday. I simply waited. The blowback was immediate and purely systemic. It wasn't hostility. It was profound confusion. My husband first tried passive aggression, leaving his dry cleaning on the chair for days, waiting for the invisible hand to pick it up. When I stepped over it for the third morning, he finally asked, "Are you okay? You seem distant." Distant. That was the language of their entitlement. To them, my presence was defined by proximity to their needs. When I prioritized my own center, they perceived a withdrawal, a fault in the gravity that held their lives together. I had to explain that. I was okay, but I was no longer interested in managing his calendar. I used phrases that felt alien coming from my own mouth. "That is your responsibility," or "I am not available at that time." The children, grown now, reacted with strategic silence. They were experts in weaponizing guilt. They didn't storm or shout. They just let the responsibilities pile up, subtly implying that the chaos they were experiencing was solely due to my sudden abdication. I watched them struggle for a week before one of them missed a critical deadline. My instinct, the reflex developed over decades, screamed at me to intervene, to fix it, to prevent the pain. I locked myself in the bathroom and rode the wave of panic. That panic wasn't fear of their failure. It was fear of disappointing the identity I had worked so hard to maintain. The perfect fixer, the indispensable backbone. Letting them fail was, the ultimate act of self-care. It was ugly. It was agonizing. And it felt fundamentally wrong. But I realized that I couldn't teach them accountability by remaining their safety net. And I couldn't find myself while still playing the administrative assistant to their lives. The boundaries I was setting weren't walls built for defense. They were fences built around a small, desolate patch of land I was finally claiming as my own. That land was barren. When the noise subsided, when the expectations weren't constantly ringing in my ears, a dreadful silence descended. This was the moment of true reckoning. For 25 years, I had defined myself by function. I knew how to manage a budget, nurse a fever, navigate school politics, and plan a flawless vacation. But when I stripped away the duties of wife and mother, there was a vacuum. Who was the woman standing here? I realized I didn't know what I truly liked. Not what was tolerated, not what was practical, not what matched the decor, but what I liked. My taste buds had been calibrated to the least objectionable option for the family. My reading choices were books everyone else recommended. My clothes were durable and forgettable. The search for meaning wasn't about finding a grand new purpose. It was about the excruciating granular work of rediscovering preferences. I tried painting. Hated it. Tried yoga. Found it irritatingly slow. I signed up for a history class, the kind I'd always wanted to take in college, and sat in the back row, feeling like an imposter. It wasn't the material that was hard. It was the sheer effort required to focus on something that didn't immediately yield a tangible service to someone else. The hardest part was sitting still without feeling the frantic, physical need to justify the I Stillness. My body had been trained to associate rest with laziness, and laziness with moral failure. I started taking long drives alone. Not to go anywhere specific, but just to listen to music I chose, loud, without checking if the bass was bothering anyone in the back seat. I ate dinner alone sometimes, ordering the spicy Thai dish no one else in the house would touch. These weren't luxuries. They were experiments in self-definition. Each small act was a chisel removing a piece of the monument I had built to codependence. I was 49, and I felt like a teenager trying on personalities, except the stakes were higher because time was no longer infinite. I wasn't starting fresh. I was digging through the ruins of a life lived for others, hoping to find a few pieces of true self sturdy enough to build the next 20 years upon. It was less about growth and more about excavation. And the dust was suffocating. The dust clears slowly. You don't get a sudden cinematic realization where everything snaps into place. That's for younger people and bad scripts. When you are 49, the realization is less a flash of light and more the slow, quiet recognition that the life you built is functionally obsolete. I stopped looking for the grand plan. The concept of starting over is romantic nonsense. You don't start over. You pivot sharply and minimize collateral damage. The goal is not to undo the past. That history made you capable of this moment, but to stop letting the past dictate the future. The first real change wasn't quitting my job or leaving my marriage. It was small, almost petty. It was saying no to organizing the neighborhood fundraiser, a commitment I had reflexively accepted every year for a decade. It was realizing the silence of an empty house on a Tuesday afternoon was sacred, not lonely. I started protecting that silence like a fierce animal guards its young. The friction started immediately. People who are accustomed to your compliance do not react well to your boundaries. They call it selfish. They call it rude, or worse, they call it a phase. My daughter called, confused why I wasn't dropping everything for her sudden minor emergency. My husband asked, bewildered, why I needed 3 hours alone in the Kaaba garage with a book and the door locked. The guilt was a physical thing. It was the familiar ache in the center of my chest, the one that used to compel me into action, into fixing everyone else's discomfort. But this time, I recognized the ache for what it was. Withdrawal symptoms from 50 years of chronic codependence. I felt terrible, and yet I did nothing to fix the feeling except breathe through it. That inaction was the most revolutionary thing I had ever done. I learned that the true self wasn't buried deep. It was just starved. It wasn't about finding a grand passion to replace motherhood or career. It was about honoring the simple, small preferences I had always overridden. I bought the expensive coffee beans, the ones only I would drink. I let the laundry pile up for a day while I finished a chapter, resisting the internal voice screaming about order. These were not acts of rebellion. They were acts of ownership. 49 is not the end of the line, but it's definitely the last call for major retooling. If I live to 90, I have 41 years left. That is enough time to build something honest, provided I stop wasting energy on maintenance that benefits everyone but me. The exhaustion hasn't vanished, but the type of exhaustion changed. Before, it was the chronic fatigue of performance, always acting, always anticipating, always managing external emotional demands. Now it's the good fatigue of honest labor, the muscle soreness after digging a solid post hole. It's the exhaustion that leads to real rest, not the kind that just piles up on top of anxiety. The biggest shift was redefining sacrifice. I had spent my life thinking that love meant making myself smaller so others could fit. I mistook sacrifice for surrender. I surrendered my desires, my time, my potential, believing that giving away myself was the definition of being good. But living for yourself doesn't mean you stop loving others. It means you stop needing to be needed. It means showing up for your own appointment, for the self you had repeatedly stood up for 50 years. The meaning of this second half of life, I finally understood, was not some heroic rediscovery or grand purpose. It was simplicity. It was quiet. It was presence. The excavation continues. The ruins of the previous life are still there. You can't erase decades of habit overnight. But now I'm using those old stones to build a smaller, sturdier house. One where the door has a good lock, where the windows face the direction I want, and where I decide who gets the key, and for how long. The path ahead is uncertain, messy, and requires constant vigilance against the old impulse to serve. But for the first time, this uncertain future feels entirely mine. That quiet, focused ownership is the new definition of peace. That is where you find the resolve to start over. Not in a bang, but in the steady, intentional sound of locking the front door.